I'm Chris Sloan, and this is my documented essay on nuclear technology, or more specifically, reasons we shouldn't do it. All right, I'll break it down into three main views against. Historical nuclear disasters. There are a couple that you know of, but maybe one or two that you haven't heard of before. Nuclear waste, the challenges associated with storing the stuff and just letting it sit. And then nuclear weapons, the humanitarian casualties that are associated, and the lasting fallout as well. Chernobyl is the textbook nuclear disaster case. It was a Russian power plant with an experiment gone wrong. The reactor on the inside turned into a molten pile of lava and was referred to as the elephant's foot. The Russian government was slow to evacuate the people, and the people actually were irradiated for about 36 hours before they had a chance to leave. A lot of cancer cases are going to come from this kind of exposure. But there is so much radiation spit out from the top of the reactor that the area around Chernobyl is uninhabitable for about 150 years. You can go there, but you don't want to live there long term because it would essentially be like baking in a light microwave oven or just a light sunburn at all times. So here's a picture of the elephant's foot on the inside of the core. You can see in the picture there's a worker and also kind of a ghost behind him, and that's because the photo itself double exposed due to the excessive radiation on the inside of the reactor. Essentially, 3 scientists had to swim down into the thing after the area was evacuated to turn it off, but they got so massively irradiated in the process that they were dead within the next 5 days. Here's another picture of the elephant's foot, just a little bit more contrast so you can kind of get a better idea of why they call it elephant's foot. But here's a photo of what one of those scientists would have looked like had they had the chance to get out. But all their skin sloughed off, their body parts started falling apart, and they probably didn't live a good last couple of days. Fukushima is a Japanese reactor that had a tsunami hit it. Level 9 tsunami overwhelmed protocols, and essentially the Daiichi reactor on the inside of the thing overwhelmed itself, and 100,000 people needed to be evacuated due to this. Here's a picture of the Daiichi reactor. It's fairly complicated, but that's all I want you to get from this. There is a lot of different pieces working together, making sure that this very dangerous process works smoothly. Challenge here, though, is what if one of them falls apart? Is there enough safety protocols in place to make sure an accident doesn't happen? Clearly, in the case of Fukushima, there was not. Kyshtym-Ozyorsk is a third case, but this was another Russian one, in which there is a 1957 covert Russian nuclear research facility that overheated, and the Russian government decided to cover it up, and they referred to it as the East Ural Nature Reserve as kind of a smoke screen. Maybe if people saw it, they'd think, oh, it's just so that the government wants to conserve animals. But in this case, it was actually they didn't want anyone there because of the radiation. A Russian scientist started poking around and finally got the area declassified in 1990. Nuclear waste. The challenge associated generally breaks down into the half-life. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years, in which if you have a sample, half of that sample will not be radioactive anymore after 24,000 years. The main byproducts of a uranium fission reaction, though, are strontium and cesium, and those have a little bit more of a manageable half-life of about 150. Those 150 years, though, they are doomed to just sit in the bottom of a concrete and steel vat on a parking lot or in some form of waste disposal facility. Those facilities are broken up into 2 different areas, high level and low level. The high level holds onto actual fuel, and then the low level is clothing, shoes, parts built inside the reactor itself. But it generally has to do with the amount of neutrons spitting off of the waste itself. So here's 2 pictures of a radioactive waste facility. The one on the left is just a bunch of concrete and steel vats. There's probably some radioactive material sitting in there. They're going to sit there for a very long time. And essentially what's just a parking lot. On the right, they wanted to hide it underground. The challenge associated when you hide something underground is that you want to have a seismically stable area. You don't want any earthquakes. If you had an earthquake, there's no telling what kind of damage is going to happen if one of those vats spits open. So the government decided to attempt to put one in Yucca Mountain, Nevada. Permits didn't go through, lawsuits were having trouble, so it was eventually not done. But there is still currently 4 out of what used to be 8 low-level radioactive waste disposal facilities. Of course, with nuclear weapons, there is the humanitarian issues. People die, and it's not necessarily their war. In Japan, I'm sure there were some people that did end up dying that had no say in World War II. There is casualties. So the world, specifically the UN, tried to do the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Got a lot of people to agree to it, but the main world powers that have nuclear weapons don't want to give them up. They subscribe to a philosophy called MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. If I have nuclear weapons and you have nuclear weapons, you're not going to shoot them at me because I'll shoot mine at you. But if I give mine up, you immediately have a military and strategic advantage. So no one wants to do that. A couple of extra interesting facts just to spice things up. Here is a picture of Tsutomu Yamaguchi. He was a man that was living in Nagasaki and was on a business trip into Hiroshima. He worked for Mitsubishi on the morning that the first nuclear missile dropped. He survived that one, went back home to Nagasaki, and survived that one too. So this is the only man to ever survive 2 nuclear blasts. Another case is the Goldsboro B-52 bomber incident, where the United States has actually accidentally dropped 2 live, I should mention, nuclear bombs on the United States. Fortunately, one of them got caught in a tree, which is the one you see here, and the other one broke apart over the middle of a field. It's partially because the B-52 bomber blew up midair. But the United States has dropped nuclear missiles in areas where civilians live. Fortunately, though, nothing bad happened.